I don't think the presence of the Tomahawks could change the situation militarily 100%. Of course, it's rather an expensive weapon. One Tomahawks unit is worth $2 million. By the way, the announced Ukrainian-produced missile Flamingo should be 4 times cheaper. But we still don't know how ready Flamingos are. We've heard that already 50 Flamingos per month are produced, but how reliable this information is, it's still not fully clear. But even the decision itself to hand Tomahawks to Ukraine, bringing Tomahawks to Ukraine should be the considerable psychological impact on the situation and onto Vladimir Putin, who is still not going to quarrel with Donald Trump, who is still hopeful that Donald Trump is the best American president possible for him, and pins his greatest hopes on future business vectors Donald Trump, involving natural resources of Russian Siberia and Arctics, Northern Sea route, and so on and so forth. And that's why if Putin understands and Trump has decided it, so Putin will understand at the same time that the United States are getting back to the coalition of Ukraine's friend, and United States are turning to the new stage of pressure into Russia. So psychologically, it would be very important because Putin is a businessman by his psychology. He counts his resources. He would never launch this aggression, full-scale aggression, against Ukraine in February 2022 if he had known that the war would last more than 3 years and a half. And now, of course, he cannot afford to get the United States as enemy again.
Yeah, so he could not just predict that Ukrainians will show that type of resistance.
Yes, this first and foremost, the spirit of resistance.
Yeah.
This readiness to resist the aggressor, because Putin was quite sure that the majority of Ukrainian population and the majority of Ukrainian elites, first and foremost, would surrender.
Yeah.
Would prefer the peaceful life under pro-Putin's authoritarian regime in Kiev to full-scale war.
Yeah. Stanislav, I see some messages coming from the Washington, D.C., from the White House regarding the Nobel Prize. So I just want to shift to that topic as well. So Donald Trump did not get the Nobel Prize, the Peace Prize. It went instead to Maria Machado, a Venezuelan opposition leader, and she's a longtime fighter for democracy and freedom in her country. Do you think this decision... Well, I wanted to ask, do you think this decision disappointed Trump, which it obviously did, but could it actually somehow affect his attitude towards the Russian war in Ukraine?
It could affect his attitude toward Europe.
Yeah.
Though Norway is not a member of European Union, and Norwegian Nobel Committee is fully, which I can quite believe, 100% independent on Norwegian powers, though being appointed by Norwegian Parliament. But Donald Trump does not understand such nuances. For him, it's all Europe, and for him, this Nobel Prize is a political move against him. Though the Nobel Committee tried to be cunning and sly enough by choosing the Venezuelan politician, knowing and emphasizing that Venezuela is another priority battlefield for Donald Trump himself, because Donald Trump promised to bring democracy to Venezuela and, in my opinion, is quite prepared for military invasion onto this country to topple the authoritarian and this drug cartel de los Soles regime of Nicolas Maduro and its allies. And it was postponed by this 10th of October, because Donald Trump didn't want to launch the invasion before the Nobel Prize winner would be proclaimed, because starting new wars is something against ethically and aesthetically to status of Nobel Prize winner, Peace Nobel Prize winner. But of course, regardless of those considerations, regardless that Donald Trump cannot disapprove Venezuelan democratic politician, whom he has to support according to his priority line toward Venezuela and its governing regime. Of course, the American president is bitterly disappointed. And he could never understand. He's dealing like a big businessman, according to the logic depicted in his book, Art of the Deal, published in first version of it had been published in 1987. And he was too aggressive toward Nobel Committee. He was too outspoken in his willingness to get the prize. And of course, it's fully against the ethics of the prize itself. And the polymarket platform has given to Trump just 4% of probability of getting the prize. And this morning, today, Friday morning, polymarket, which is still considered as a very reliable forecast vehicle, had given 70% for Ms. Machado of Venezuela. So it was more or less understandable. But of course, Trump now was very irritated and annoyed with Europe, which he doesn't like at all, because European politicians, the majority of European leaders, have been against him. And in his opinion, were against his coming to power in 2016, against his staying in power in 2020 and getting back to power in 2024. And for Donald Trump, who is already 79 and we still are not quite sure about the reliability of his health, especially cognitive one, despite, of course, his so vivid lifestyle. Donald, for him, the agenda of revenge to all enemies, to all who did not support him, all who supported him as a threat for democracy and so on, is a very important part of this presidential term. And the revenge to Europe and European leaders as well, among those positions of his priority agenda. That's why I don't expect anything favorable from Donald Trump with regard to today's Nobel Committee decision, though understanding that Nobel Committee had no way out. He could not afford itself to grant Donald Trump for this prize, though, properly speaking, Donald Trump deserves maybe not the Nobel Prize, which he's not very compatible with for several considerations, for several reasons. But of course, as a peacekeeper, he deserves a great respect for such moves like such projects like Abraham Accords, for instance, of 2020, yes, which, in my opinion, is a strategic outline, not just for Middle East, but for the humanity at all, and maybe the international organization, including military lines, which maybe could be built around the Abraham Accords after their broadening in coming years, could replace the United Nations organization to a very considerable extent, also in coming years. Donald Trump deserves, of course, our applauses for the normalization of the majority, which suddenly happened after he was re-elected American president in November 2024. Like Barack Obama deserves the Nobel Prize for the full normalization and destigmatization of minorities. So in the same way, Trump deserves it as well. But of course, he was a little bit both aggressive and naive about this hope at any rate and at all price, at any price, to get the Nobel Prize this year.